in the fight for peace and justice in the United States, Ms. Ann Wright. She'll tell her own story, but I'll just mention Ann is a career U.S. Army officer, retired colonel, also a U.S. diplomat that worked at the State Department. She resigned in protest of the invasion of Iraq. She's also on the advisory board of Veterans for Peace, as well as being active in several other organizations, the International Peace Bureau, World Beyond War, the Gaza Freedom Flotilla, No to NATO, and a Code Pink board member. I think she's pretty busy. What do you think? Ann graciously responded to our call. Many of you know that Susan Schnall, our president of Veterans Peace, was scheduled to come, but unavoidably she had a family emergency, and Ann graciously responded and stepped up and said she would come. We are so thankful for your graciousness and so thankful that you are here. Ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Ann Wright.
Well, thank you so much, Kevin, and thank you to Bill, who has been helping organize this thing, and to Julie, who's been kind to be my host for the day. And also, I want to remember our good friend, George Martin. Amen. He's been a friend to all of us and all over the country. I mean, it just wasn't Milwaukee that had George Martin, it was the whole world that had him. So, to George Martin, presente. We're here to talk about Armistice Day. We're at Armistice Day, you know, the day that was the day to end all wars from 1914 to 1918. When it finally ended, it was the Armistice that ended it, and we were to celebrate peace for thereafter. Well, it's been thereafter, hasn't been too peaceful, has it? It really, as Reggie mentioned, we haven't had much of a peace, not much of a day of peace. How many of you all read Howard Zinn's People's History of the United States? Well, yeah, that's where it's really laid out in the true history of the United States, how little peace that we have had. Our students, we as students, didn't learn about all of the wars that the United States had been in, and tragically, it's not ending at all. I mean, if we look at what's going on right now, where we've got, we finally got the Afghanistan war ended, but the war in Afghanistan continues on many of the Afghans. The war that I resigned over in 2003, the Iraq War, has ended in some ways, but the countries have never been the same after that. And as Roger told about Vietnam, I mean, that's never been the same. The wars that the United States has been in, after we say we are for peace, and we as veterans on the day that now our government says it's not an armistice for peace, it's a time to recognize veterans who go out and fight the wars. So that's why I'm really proud of Veterans for Peace for saying, no, we want to bring back what the original meaning was of this day. It's for peace. It's not to glorify the people that have gone to fight wars and mostly come back injured, as one should be when you go out and kill your cousins. And I think what you said about the cousins of the Russians and the Ukrainians' cousins and the Palestinians and the Israelis' cousins, I mean, these are wars of cousins. And you would think at this time in our legacy of, human beings that we could finally learn not to be at war, but no, we're not. And so here we have, today we've got the genocide going on in Gaza. I'm wearing proudly the Veterans for Peace t-shirt that says Veterans Against Genocide. That's right. We are against genocide as individuals and as a national organization. We are against genocide. It doesn't matter where it happens, we're against it. And We're against weapons going in to fuel all of these wars, and whether it's in weapons going into the Ukraine, Russia conflict. I mean, we're sending weapons into Ukraine, and all sorts of other countries are sending them into Russia, and all it does is just fuel these things. We have the U.S. that's still participating in bombings. I mean, we are bombing in Iraq, we're bombing in Syria, we've bombed in Yemen. We look to Africa, as you've mentioned, where in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, still chaos reigns there. The gangs are murdering each other, and we have the largest movement of human beings now in the world is out of the Sudan, with a huge population displacement there. And in Haiti, just today, we hear that the Prime Minister of Haiti has been removed from office for a variety of reasons. And the chaos right within, stone's throw of the United States, and a country that was the first elected democracy, the republic in our hemisphere, and it is still being tormented many times by what the U.S. is doing to it. And we'll just add to that Cuba, where the largest sanctions that the U.S. has ever put on in the 60 years that we've been putting on sanctions. The Trump administration put 270 sanctions on it, and the Biden administration didn't take any of them off. So we have things that are going on around this world that say that the Armistice Day really doesn't mean a whole lot to most of our politicians, but we as citizens certainly want to be known as people that want peace and not these wars. And that's why I think your characterization of how many of y'all want to be serial harassers, I love that. Well, that's what I've been doing for the last year, being in Washington, D.C. with Code Pink Women for Peace, with Veterans for Peace. This coming week we have Peace Action that's organized, days of action in the U.S. Congress, where we harass Congress people. And they need to be harassed because of the votes that they're doing that are providing the weapons to fuel all of these conflicts. Right. So how many of you all have ever been to the U.S. Congress and walked around the halls and gone into some of the offices? Well, quite a few of you. But for those of you that haven't, I mean, it is amazing. You still, let's knock on wood, that in the next 4 years this doesn't stop. But right now, you can walk right into the halls of Congress. You can knock on the door of congressional offices, and most of the time you don't even have to knock on them. You just open the door and go in and tell why you are there, what issue you are, and if you've made an appointment, you might get a time with a staff member. Very seldom do you actually talk to the Congress people themselves, but there are ways that you do find the Congress people, and it's usually when they are going to and from congressional hearings. And that's what Kevin mentioned, that I've been on TV a few times. Well, that's usually when I get on TV, is when either you're in the congressional hearings and you stand up to tell the congressmen and women what you really think about the subject that they're talking about. Because seldom do the Congress people or the people that are testifying tell the whole truth about everything. And we do have the right to sit in as the public in these congressional hearings and let them know what we feel. But of course there's a price to it. And that's usually, there's a tap on the shoulder if the cops are being nice. If they're not being so nice, they just reach right over and start pulling you out. And that's where age comes in. And so all of you all that are over the age of, whatever, it's good to let them know. I'm 78 years old. I have a hip replacement. And now I can say, I have a hip replacement. I have a knee replacement. Don't drag me around here and stop these wars and stop funding all of this stuff and So you too can do that. And, how many of you all, well, maybe I shouldn't even ask this, but how many of you all have ever been arrested? Oh, come on. Good, that's right. Because every one of us needs to be arrested. We need to go into these jails. We need to go in and testify about what is happening in the jails in our communities. It is a real eye-opener when you go in and see who else is in jail. And you hear the stories of what people have done. And it's not murder. It's generally not drugs. Well, sometimes it's drugs, but it's generally things that you just would not think that a person would be put in jail for having your turn signal on too long, or, well, if you haven't paid your fines from other things, you do get pulled over, and if they run your name, then you may get pulled in. The last time I was in jail was in Galveston, Texas, and this was because we had blocked the entrance to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, who had given a permit for giant oil tankers to come down Matagorda Bay, disrupting a 30-year-old capped mercury fund super site. They had given a permit for this destruction of this waterway, and I had a friend that was a fisherwoman right there, Diane Wilson. And Diane said, we've got to stop this thing. Let's go over to the Corps of Engineers and we're going to blockade. So we blockade with a fishing boat, a tiny fishing boat that had been brought in on, a little trailer. They took the air out of the tires of the trailer so that it was immovable. And then we chained ourselves into that fishing boat and said, yeah, we're blocking this until you take back that permit. Well, we waited and we waited and we waited, and finally there was a police car that came up, and some of our supporters went over to it and said, they're blocking the road, and aren't you going to arrest them? And because you don't want to wait forever for these arrests. You got other things to do besides getting this thing done. And the policeman said, well, yeah, they're in the middle of the road, but I see cars going around them on both directions, so I guess they're not really blocking the road. And it's like, well, what do you have to do to get arrested in this place? It said, well, if you go out to the middle of that road and you sit down in the middle of that one, I've got to arrest you right then. So it was like, oh, geez, here we go. So unlocking ourselves from the boat, getting in the middle of the road, and, finally get arrested. And then we went into the jail, and who were sitting in the women's side of it? It was women who had not done any drugs, who had not done it was mostly traffic violations and things like that. And as we heard the stories of these women of being disrupted from their whole lives for these things that shouldn't be, that is one of the reasons why we all need to go in there and work for jail reform. So it's one of the civic duties that we have. We can disrupt the Congress, but we also have to take the heat for what happens with it, and it actually turns out very good for us as an educational process to see all the facets of our government. Well, enough about getting arrested. Okay, so that is part of your homework for next year. I hope that we're able to see a lot more hands go up on this. Peaceful, nonviolent protest that sometimes ends in these things. But if we look at what we're doing around the world, and for the last about 10 years, we've been saying we have 800 U.S. military bases around the world, outside the United States. Well, it's gone up. It's gone up now. We are reducing the presence of the U.S. military. We are now increasing it. In fact, now the estimates are we have 900 bases. And where are they? Where is the U.S. saying we need to increase the military presence? Well, if you look in Europe right now, where is the largest military base, U.S. military base in Europe? How many of you all during the Vietnam era, which military base was biggest? What country had the U.S. military base? Probably Germany, yeah. It's not Germany anymore. How about the country of Romania? Romania now has U.S. military bases in it. Poland has U.S. military bases in it. How about Scandinavia? Now we have U.S. military bases. They're not formal U.S. military bases, but the Scandinavian countries of Norway, Sweden, and Finland have given access to the U.S. military for 36 bases. And the U.S. military has increased the number of military exercises in Scandinavia by quadrupling what it normally has. If you look out, I live in Hawaii, and let me just tell you, I'm cold today here in Milwaukee. Your little brief adventure into what I would call a severe winter. But for you all, I mean, some of you are walking around in t-shirts. But from Hawaii, which is the base, the headquarters of the Indo-Pacific Command, the U.S. military command from the west coast of the United States all the way over to India. It's the largest geographic unified command that the military has, and its headquarters is in Hawaii, the very militarized state of Hawaii. On the island that I live on, Oahu, we have 5 major military bases, 5 of them. On the big island of Hawaii is the largest training area in the Pacific. It's called Puakaloa, and it's between the 2 volcanoes of Mauna Kea and Mauna Loa. And it's not just a training area for the United States, but the Japanese are sending in training people. The Australians are sending in. We have the largest naval exercise war games in the world that are off the shores of Hawaii every 2 years. It's called Rim of the Pacific. Rim of the Pacific. And it was just held this last summer. We had 25,000 military that were part of it, 29 nations, 4 submarines, 25 sea vessels, 200 aircraft, and guess what countries participated? It wasn't just the Pacific Rim countries, it was NATO countries. 8 members of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. So what in the world is NATO Atlantic doing in the Pacific? It's that the U.S. is urging countries that have any alliances with them to be ready to help out in case we do something in Asia. And of course, with the Obama administration, 16 years ago, when they started pivoting toward the Pacific, pivoting toward Asia, because they were drawing down in Iraq, and we always need an enemy, otherwise how can you keep these weapons flowing? As you mentioned, how can we keep all of these industries in power and building all of this merchandise unless we've got a reason for it? And so we needed another enemy, and so all of a sudden here came China. I mean, for decades China has not been our enemy. I mean, it's been an economic competitor, that's for sure. And it certainly has had human rights violations, and they should be called out on that, as we should be called out on our human rights violations. But there's no reason that we should be challenging and saying that China is our enemy, for God's sakes. I mean, there are a few things that I kind of think that our politicians ought to take into account, like how big are these countries that we're calling our enemies? How many people do they have? Like 2.5 billion, and let's see, we have 320 million. I mean, manpower-wise, I don't think that's a really good idea. And since probably half of us would be without clothing tomorrow if we stop the imports of Chinese clothing, merchandise, and all that, I mean, it's like, why are you doing this? Except it's on the economic side, but now it's turning into, a real dangerous military situation where the Chinese, having seen us go into other places around the world, have bucked up their military and the number of vessels that they have in their military. While the U.S. is going in to buck up Taiwan, the Republic of China, we've had a one China policy since the Nixon administration. What was that, 40 years ago, one China? Well, all of a sudden, starting with the Obama administration, we started sending in high-level diplomats. We started increasing the amount of weaponry that we make available for sale or loan. And so the PRC, the People's Republic of China, every time a U.S. diplomat comes in to Taiwan, there is a fleet of jet aircraft that come from the mainland of China that come right up to the air defense zone of Taiwan saying, remember, this is a one China policy, and The Chinese have not invaded Taiwan, and while they say that Taiwan is a province of China, it's the provocations that we are giving to this whole situation that makes it so dangerous. Few more things about the Pacific. The Philippines, for 30 years the U.S. Was kicked out of the Philippines. Well, now we have 9 bases in the Philippines. Guam, the small little island of Guam, is about ready to sink because it has such an increase in the number of U.S. military bases. The newest Marine base, it's been 50 years since the Marines have had a new Marine base, and it was just inaugurated in Guam. So thousands of Marines are coming out of Okinawa there. Marines are going into Australia. We have military, the military is building runways in Micronesia, Palau, and then the Marshall Islands, which has been the testing ground for our nuclear weapons back in the 1960s, and is the back end of the missiles that come out of Vandenberg Air Base, intercontinental ballistic missiles that are fired in the longest trajectory that we have had go into the Marshall Islands. And so 3 of their islands there are still U.S. military territory. The U.S. is opening new embassies in the Pacific in places we've never had because the Chinese have reached out to the Solomon Islands. So the United States finally is having a U.S. embassy in the Solomon Islands, in Vanuatu, in Tonga, in Kiribati. All of these new places that the U.S. is now focusing on because of the pivot to Asia, the pivot to the Pacific that is actually being challenged by the Chinese, saying this is our front yard. The U.S. says, well, that's our backyard, all the way from California through Hawaii, all the way to China. That's our backyard. So we can do anything we want in there, to include sending armadas of ships. We have armadas of ships, just not one little ship. Every time an aircraft carrier goes through the South China Seas, it has a group of usually 10 other vessels that accompany it to protect it. And so these armadas are sailing through in what are called freedom of the seas military operations, authorized by the Law of the Sea Conference, which the United States is not even a member of. But we'll go ahead and use whatever we want from it. The types of new drone warfare that we need to be concerned about in these days of the Armistice Day, the Day of Peace. Well, the types of weaponry that are being developed that we, the United States, are using, some of which we're getting from the Israeli military. The cooperation between the Israeli military and the U.S. military has been going on for a long, long time. And in fact, a lot of the things that the U.S. has done in Afghanistan and Iraq were based on things that the Israelis have been doing to Gaza over the last 20 years. The use of drones in Gaza, the Ukraine, and in Russia. New techniques of how do you kill people? Well, how about we put explosive devices in pagers and walkie-talkies and find a way for a country to buy those things and then we blow them up. And how about we just go ahead and go to another country and execute people, which was done in Iran, where the Israelis, for some reason, this still is a mystery to me, how the Israelis were able to get into one of the Iranian military VIP lodgings and put an explosive device into a place where Haniya had stayed 6 months before. And then when he went there and stayed in it, to blow him up. I was in Europe a couple of weeks ago and attending a conference in The Hague, a small peace conference. And as one part of the conference, they took us over to the International Criminal Court and gave us a tour of it. And one of the justices on the court was kind enough to give us a briefing there. And as a part of this, they handed us little brochures about the cases that the International Criminal Court had in front of them. And so I thumbed through it, and sure enough, there was the one, Palestine and Israel. where the prosecutor of the ICC had recommended to one of the appellate courts that arrest warrants be issued to 3 Palestinians that were a part of Hamas and 2 Israelis, Prime Minister Netanyahu and Defense Minister Gallant, who's no longer the defense minister. Well, I asked the judge, I said, will it have any influence on what happens on the issuance of these arrest warrants when 2 of the people that were to get the arrest warrants have already successfully assassinated the other 3? Mm-hmm. And that's what's happened. None of the 3 Hamas leadership are alive today. They have been essentially executed. Well, the justice, as one would expect, she kind of grimaced and went, well, this is a case that's still under, we can't really comment on it. But it just shows, the strange things that we're dealing with right now, that we have new kinds of warfare that are going on, that we have wars that are going on all over the place. And yet while we sit here in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and I want to thank Veterans for Peace Chapter 102 for having what I suspect is the largest group of people in the United States that are meeting on Armistice Day under the auspices of Veterans for Peace. You all ought to be so proud of yourselves. And to have had this going on for what? Now this is the 18th year that you all have been coming to the City Hall of Milwaukee and saying that you are for peace and not for war. So it's a great honor to be here. It's a great honor to hear the stories of how many of you all have been out on those street corners every Friday or every Saturday since the beginning of the Iraq War. All of the things that you in Milwaukee are doing to make our world a much safer and better place. And the Back from the Brink campaign, where we really need to be serious about trying to get nuclear weapons out of the hands of everybody. I'll just mention one thing. In the island of Hawaii, the big island they call it, Hawaii, in the city of Hilo, the city or the county council just this last week has now taken the exemption away from the U.S. military to their nuclear-free zone. They had a nuclear-free zone that started back in the 1980s, except they gave, guess who? The U.S. military an exemption. I mean, who else has nuclear weapons? It's not like any of us do. Well, finally, at long last, they were able to get the county council to say, to vote that the military no longer has that exemption. And so if the military tries to bring in a nuclear-powered ship into the Big Island, which I'm sure they're going to do, then we have something to hang on to. The last time this was brought to a head back in 1983 when one of the great activists of Hawaii, Jim Albertini, jumped in front of a nuclear-powered ship as it was coming into Hilo Harbor to try to stop it. He got 3 years in federal prison for that. But now it is, 40 years later, we're trying to get this military exemption off and have succeeded on it. So with all of that, we do have some wins. It's going to be a tough next 4 years on a variety of things. The Trump administration has a lot of things that they're cooking up for us to try to silence a lot of protests. But that's where we have to be really strong. And the ACLU has already come out with a full-page ad in yesterday's paper saying we're the ACLU and we're not moving to Canada. We're staying right here, and listed all the things that they anticipate they're going to be challenging the Trump administration very soon. So with that, I will turn it back over. It's a pleasure to be here, and Milwaukee's a great city, and you've got great activists, and keep up the work, and for sure, write all those congressmen and be a serial harasser of the U.S. Congress. Thank you.
Wasn't that great? Thank you so much, Aaron. Well, again, I want to thank everyone in this room for attending our 18th annual Reclaim Armistice Day event, where together we celebrated peace, not war. I want to thank our musicians, Richard, David, and Harvey. And we're going to ask them to come up, and while we're going out, if they want to send us off a song, that would be wonderful. I want to thank our speakers tonight, Reggie and Ann, and also Roger, our own Roger as well. And I want to thank you for attending, but not just attending. I want to thank you for your continued commitment to peace and justice in the city of Milwaukee and in our war-torn world. Peace. Thank you so much. Thank you for coming. Give yourself
The world had all to
Want one or both?
Eat both.
country I saw on mighty road, filled with women and men, and the paper they were signing said they'd never fight
Do you know Kevin
again.
Barrett?
You know what? Give it a try. Last night I had the strangest dream I've ever dreamed.
He's definitely, I'm examining
I dreamed the world had all
Yeah, his discourse is illegal in a lot of
Right. Do you have your name on here somewhere? Can I give you my name, maybe?
and a million copies made.
This is a real test of my system here. Okay.
And bound their
Yeah, just give me a call. Yeah, or text me. Cool. Thanks.
And the people in the streets below were dancing round and round, and guns and swords and uniforms were scattered on the ground. Last night I had the strangest dream I've ever dreamed before. I dreamed the world had all agreed to put an end to war.